Hi guys, so today we are going to continue with our read aloud, Counting by 7's. And what I'm going to ask you guys to do as you listen to me read aloud chapter 4 to you guys is to really do some artistic work, actually, some drawing here. I started my drawing of what I really felt like the setting of this story is, and for some reason, I know this isn't necessarily where the story took place, but this is where I feel like I started to really understand the character here, and it was at her home. So much of the story really talks about the home and where her sanctuary is. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about Willow Chance and her garden. So I have a little picket fence here, and I drew her home over here, and I really wanted to try to visualize this tranquil setting that she spent a lot of time in chapter 3 really talking about, so that it could help me understand chapter 4. So I really just started to draw what I was envisioning as the setting as I was listening to the story, and I want you guys to do the same today. I have a swing here, a little table with some lemonade, a bunch of the different plants that she discussed, and I want you guys to visualize in your mind what you believe the setting to Counting by 7's is, and then spend some time being artistic here. You do not have to be you do not have to be creative or perfect. I just want you to be drawing something to help you really dive into this story. So make sure you have your writer's notebook out, and we are going to start Counting by 7's chapter 4. Here we go. My parents made a few more suggestions before the first day of class actually began. I decided that they both must have been traumatized as teenagers. Remember, we were talking about how her parents weren't sure that her gardening outfit was the best outfit to wear on her first day of her new school. I decided that they both must have been traumatized as teenagers, and on the first morning at an entirely new school, I packed my red wheeled luggage designated for frequent business travelers and purchased to transport my books and supplies, and we headed out the door to the car. My mother and father both insisted on dropping me off, but neither parent, per my direction, would accompany me inside. I had reviewed the floor plan of the actual building, and I memorized everything from the ceiling heights to the emergency exits to the electrical outlet locations. This girl is a genius. I was pre-enrolled in English, math, Spanish, physical education, social studies, and science. With the exception of PE, I knew a lot about the subjects, and I had calculated the amount of time I needed to walk the halls, as well as the cubic feet of the storage closets. I could recite the entire Sequoia student handbook, and as we pulled out of the driveway, I was anxious, but I knew for certain one thing. I was ready for middle school. Boy, was I wrong. The place was so loud. The girls were shrieking and the boys were physically attacking each other, or at least that's how it appeared. I hated to remove my red Panama hat. It was my signature color. But the hat was designed, after all, for sun protection. I had only taken 4 steps into the mob when a girl approached. She came right up to me and said, "The toilet in the second stall is broken and it's really gross." And she waved her arm in the direction of more meat eaters, and then she was gone. And it took me a moment to process her statement. Was she giving me some sort of informational heads up? And I could hear her talking to 2 girls next to a row of lockers, and she didn't have the same intensity. I looked through the swarm and I saw a slight, dark-haired man pulling a wheeled chair, and it was loaded with cleaning supplies. 2 mops were attached to the back, and I stared at him and I realized that he and I were dressed exactly alike. But he was pulling a cleaning trolley, not luggage with wheels, that had a 360-degree rotation option. And then I had been distressing, I thought. It was possible that the girl believed that I was some sort of maintenance worker. I lasted less than 3 hours. The place made me severely nauseated. For health and safety reasons, I went to the office and insisted on calling home. I waited outside at the curb, and just the sight of my mom's car in the distance made it easier for me to breathe. When I climbed inside, my mother instantly said, "First days are always hard." If I were the kind of person who cried, I'm sure that I would have, but that's not in my character, and I almost never cry. Instead, I just nodded and stared out the window. I can disappear like that into myself. Once we were home, I spent the rest of the afternoon in my garden. I didn't till the soil or weed the flower beds or try to graft a tree limb. I sat in the shade and I listened to my Japanese language instruction. That night I found myself staring out the window at the sky and counting by 7's for what seemed like a new record. I tried to roll with it, but what I learned and what I was being taught had no intersection. While my teachers labored over the rigors of their chosen subjects, I sat in the back pretty much bored out of my mind because I knew this stuff, so instead I studied other students and I came to a few conclusions about the middle school experience. Number one, clothing was very important. In my opinion, if the world were perfect, everybody would wear lab coats in an educational setting, but that obviously was not happening. The average teenager was willing to wear very uncomfortable attire, and from my observation, the older you get, the more you like the word cozy. That's why most of the elderly wear pants with elastic waistbands, if they wear pants at all. This may explain why grandparents are in love with buying grandkids pajamas and bathrobes. The outfits worn by my fellow students were, in my opinion, either way too tight or way too loose. Apparently, having something that actually fits was not acceptable. Haircuts and accessories were defining. The color black was very popular. Some of the students worked very hard to stand out, and others put just as much effort into bleeding in. Music was some kind of religion, and it seemed to bring people together and tear them apart. It identified a group, and apparently it prescribed ways to behave and react. Interaction between the male species and the female species was varied and intense and very highly unpredictable. There was more touching than I thought there would be. Some students had no ambitions whatsoever, and no attention was paid to nutrition, and the word deodorant was not yet understood by over half of the boys, and the word awesome was very overused. I want you to just think, are you able to relate to anything that Willow Chance is saying here? Because not only me being a middle schooler once in my life, but also being a middle school teacher, I can completely understand some of these things, most of these things. I was only 7 days into my latest educational misendeavor when I walked into English class to find Mrs. Cullenmaster making an announcement. This morning, everyone will be taking a standardized test administered to all students in the state of California. On your desk, you have a booklet and a number 2 pencil. Do not open the booklets until I have given instructions to do so. Mrs. Kleinsasser signaled that she was ready, and she started a clock. I suddenly decided to pay attention. I took the pencil and I began filling in the ovals with the answers. In 17 minutes and 47 seconds, I got up from my seat and I walked to the front of the room where I handed the answer form and the booklet to the teacher. I slipped out the door and I thought it was impossible that I heard the whole classroom whispering. I received a perfect score. I headed into Mrs. Kleinsasser's class a week later, and she was waiting for me, and she said, "Willow Chance, Principal Rudin needs to see you." My fellow middle schoolers buzzed at this news like a pollen-soaked worker bee, and I went to the door, but at the last minute I turned back. It must have been obvious that I wanted to say something because the room was quiet, and as I faced my classmates, I found my voice, and said, "The human corpse flower has blossomed, and I am certain no one got it." I took a seat in Principal Rudin's office, which was much less impressive than I had hoped. The anxious woman leaned on her desk, and her brow knitted into a strange pattern of angled intersecting lines. I felt certain that if I stared long enough, I would find a math theory in the woman's forehead. But the lines rearranged themselves before I could work out the dynamic. And the principal said, "Willow, do you know why you're here?" And I made the decision to answer, hoping that might cause the skin above her eyes to knit up again. The administrator didn't blink as she stared right at me. "You cheated." I found myself answering, "I didn't cheat at anything." And Principal Rudin explained, your file shows that you were identified several years ago of having high aptitude. Your teachers report no evidence of that, and no one in the state got a perfect score. And I felt my face grow really warm, and I said, really? But what I wanted to shout out was, your left elbow displays in the fifth form of psoriasis, an aerodermic condition categorized by intense redness and large patches. A course of 2.5% cortisone cream application combined with a regulated exposure to sunlight without sunburn, of course, would be my recommendation for relief. But I didn't. I had very little experience with authority and zero experience as a practicing physician, so I didn't define myself. I just clammed up. What followed was a one-sided 47-minute-long interrogation. The principal, unable to prove the deception but certain that it had happened, finally let me go, but not before she put in a formal request for me to see the behavioral counselor at the district's main office. And that's where the real problem kids were sent. My counselor's name was Del Duke. Next time, we will talk all about Del Duke. Go ahead and make sure you finish up your setting drawing now. I would really love to see this visual, and send me an email with your drawing if you want to. Have a great day. Adios.